policies around that fact. Now, I do talk about deindustrialization, and in a sense that's true. Manufacturing is a declining share of our economy and our economic activity, just as we've de-agriculturalized over the last century, even though we're probably producing more farm goods than ever before, thanks in part to government subsidies. But my point being, in manufacturing as in agriculture, the story has been a general trend upward in output, even though employment has been falling because the workers are so much more productive. I was on a talk radio show on a Delaware station a few months ago, and one of the callers said this very common sentiment. He said, "We just don't make anything anymore." Well, I've looked at what we make, and you go back to 2007, the most recent year for the figures, and American workers on American soil, just 2 years ago, produced 5,000 civilian aircraft, 15,000 aircraft engines, 10 million motor vehicles, 14 million air conditioners, 38 million appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, over 1 billion square yards of carpet and rugs, tens of millions. That's a lot.
That's a lot of carpet.
You can carpet 6 million homes with what we produce in a year. 20 million tons of chlorine gas, over 1 billion gallons of paint, and of course billions of semiconductors, pills, and books. These are printed in the good old US of A. That's a lot of stuff. We're doing it with fewer workers because they're so much more productive. Well, you can see I like to use a lot of facts and figures because I think they're important. And the other side certainly uses a lot. But their favorite weapon of choice is the anecdote. And I dissect one of the other side of the anecdotes in the book. There was a book written a few years ago called The Selling of Free Trade by John MacArthur, a very critical review of NAFTA. And he spends the first 50 pages of the book telling the story of a factory in Long Island City, New York, in Queens, that made staplers, swing line staplers. They made the classic 747 stapler at this factory in Queens. It says made in the USA, and right there, Long Island City, New York. A very substantial stapler. This could be a murder weapon. It's so substantial. Well, the factory closed in 1998. 400 union jobs went to Nogales, Mexico. Aha, the giant sucking sound, right? We signed NAFTA, and a stapler factory moves to Mexico. Well, I did a little digging. It turns out that factory was very atypical. That was a good year for U.S. manufacturing. Overall output went up 7%. In the first 5 years of NAFTA, we added 500,000 manufacturing jobs. So here you have all the statistical evidence pointing one way, and the other side finds one example and spins 50 pages about it. But I make the point that this was inevitable. To make low-tech staplers a 15-minute subway ride from Manhattan wasn't going to last. In fact, on a trip to New York, I got on the subway and went out there to the 2 factory sites where they used to make these staplers. The neighborhood's doing fine. It's full of shops. It's got a community college there, a YMCA. One building is a transportation point for several companies. It has a tennis club and a hardware facility. The other plant where they used to make these staplers was actually the home to the Museum of Modern Art for 3 years when it was being refurbished, and now it's a storage facility. The point being that when a particular factory goes out of business, we often find a higher and better use for it. Well, a lot of the anxieties about Japan 20 years ago, Mexico 10 years ago, are now focused on China, right? All our jobs were supposed to go to Mexico. That didn't quite work out that way. Now they're all supposed to go to China. They just got the country wrong. Well, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about China because it's on everybody's mind. And I think the fears about China are equally unfounded. The way we should think about China is not as a direct competitor to a range of U.S. industries, but as the final link in an increasing increasingly sophisticated global supply chain in which Americans play a very important part. People who know a lot about producing over in China talk about the smiley curve. You ever seen those smile, have a nice day buttons from the 70s? Well, the smiley curve is the value added in the supply chain as you move through the production process. And just imagine that smile, that arc. At the beginning is the high value added. It's the brand name, the design and engineering, the high-end components that go into a product. And then it swoops down and you get the fairly low-tech assembly, just putting the parts together. And then the value added swoops up again when you're in distribution and retail and service. And what better example of that than an iPod Touch. Leave it to Apple. On the back, it's in pretty small print, but